The thunder rolled across the plains as Wyatt Parker stood motionless before the fresh grave, his weathered hat clutched against his chest while four small figures huddled around him, too young to fully comprehend the permanence of death. Arizona Territory, 1885, had been merciless to the Parker family, taking Sarah in childbed fever just 3 days after she'd delivered their fourth child, a boy who would never know his mother's touch. The wind whipped across the cemetery on the outskirts of Bentonville, Arizona, tugging at Wyatt's coat and the tattered edges of his resolve. At 32, he found himself alone with 4 children, 7-year-old twins Emma and Elijah, 3-year-old Charlotte, and the unnamed newborn boy who slept, blissfully unaware, in Emma's careful arms. "Pa," Emma's small voice broke through his grief. "The baby's getting cold." Wyatt nodded, clearing his throat. "Let's go home," he said, though the word home felt hollow now. He guided his small family back to their wagon, helping the children climb aboard before taking the reins. The mournful procession of townsfolk who had come to pay their respects began to disperse, leaving just the Parker family to return to their ranch outside Bentonville. The 2-room cabin that had once felt cozy now seemed cavernous without Sarah's presence. As he ushered the children inside, Wyatt felt the crushing weight of responsibility settle upon his shoulders. The ranch hands would help with the cattle, but the children, how could he possibly raise 4 children alone? The baby began to wail, a piercing sound that echoed the emptiness in Wyatt's heart. "What do we do now, Pa?" Elijah asked, his small face serious. Wyatt placed his hat on the hook by the door, a gesture so ordinary it felt blasphemous in the face of their extraordinary grief. "We keep going," he answered, though he had no idea how. As night fell across the ranch, Wyatt sat in the rocking chair Sarah had loved, the unnamed baby boy in his arms. The child would not settle, refusing the goat's milk Wyatt had managed to prepare. The twins and Charlotte had finally fallen asleep, exhausted by grief and confusion. "I don't know what to do," Wyatt whispered to the child. "Your mama would know." The baby's cries grew more frantic, and Wyatt felt tears sting his eyes for the first time since Sarah had drawn her last breath. He'd been too busy arranging the funeral, caring for the children, and accepting the condolences of neighbors to properly feel his grief. Now, in the quiet darkness, it crashed over him like a flash flood, violent and unstoppable. "Please," he begged the child, "please stop crying. I can't do this alone." But the baby continued to wail, and Wyatt continued to rock. Through the long, desperate night, dawn broke across the Parker ranch, finding Wyatt slumped in the rocking chair, the baby finally quiet against his chest. A knock at the door startled him awake. He carefully laid the infant in the cradle Sarah had prepared with such joy and hope, then moved to answer the door. Mrs. Thompson, the preacher's wife, stood on his porch with a covered dish. "Brought you some breakfast, Mr. Parker," she said kindly. "How are the little ones?" Wyatt accepted the dish with a nod of thanks. "They're surviving. The baby won't take to the goat's milk." "Perhaps a wet nurse already asked around," Wyatt interrupted, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "Nobody available." Mrs. Thompson's face softened with sympathy. "Well, I'll be by later to help with the laundry. The ladies of the church have arranged a schedule." After she left, Wyatt roused the children, helped them dress, and tried to coax some breakfast into them. The baby started crying again, a sound that seemed to pierce Wyatt's very soul. The days blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and helpless days. The women of Bentonville came by in shifts, tending to the laundry, bringing food, and offering advice for the baby, who grew weaker by the day. Wyatt had named him Samuel, after his father, but feared the name would soon be carved on another gravestone. A week after the funeral, the ranch hands approached Wyatt as he attempted to mend a fence while Charlotte played nearby and the twins watched the baby. "Boss," said Frank, the oldest of the hands at 45, "we're worried about you and the young uns. You ain't slept in days. The cattle need attention, and them children need more than you can give 'em right now." Wyatt drove a nail with more force than necessary. "What would you have me do, Frank? Abandon my children? Give up the ranch Sarah and I built together?" "Course not," Frank replied, adjusting his hat. but maybe think about hiring a woman to help, a proper housekeeper like someone who could tend to the children while you run the ranch." "With what money?" Wyatt demanded. Between the doctor bills and the funeral we're stretched thin. Frank exchanged glances with the other men. "We'd be willing to take half wages till things pick up, all of us would." Wyatt looked up, surprised by the offer. These men had families of their own, responsibilities. "I can't ask that of you." "Ain't asking, we're offering," Frank said firmly. "Sarah was good to all of us. Let us do this for her children." That night, Wyatt placed an advertisement in the Bentonville Gazette for a housekeeper, though he had little hope anyone suitable would respond. The town was small, and most women were already busy with their own households. Another week passed, each day more difficult than the last. Samuel continued to fade, refusing most of what Wyatt tried to feed him. The twins did their best to help with Charlotte, but they were just children themselves. Wyatt found himself praying for the first time since he was a boy, begging for some kind of miracle. It came on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after Sarah's death, in the form of a knock at the door. Emma reached it first, pulling it open before Wyatt could stop her. On the porch stood a young woman with copper hair tucked neatly beneath a bonnet, her green eyes warm despite the weariness evident in her face. In her arms, she held a loaf of bread. "Hello," she said softly. "My name is Ruby Dawson. I've come about the housekeeper position." Emma stared up at her with wide eyes. "Are you an angel?" Ruby smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "No, just a woman looking for work." She glanced past Emma to where Wyatt stood, Samuel fussing weakly in his arms. "And it seems I've come to the right place." Wyatt shifted the baby, studying the woman before him. She was young, perhaps 25, with a quiet dignity about her despite her plain dress and the travel dust on her shoes. "You're new to Bentonville," he stated rather than asked. "Yes," Ruby answered. "I arrived on yesterday's stage from Tucson. I saw your advertisement in the newspaper." "Have you experience with children?" Wyatt asked, aware of how desperate he must sound. Ruby nodded, her eyes on the fussing infant. "I helped raise my younger siblings after my mother passed, 5 of them." Samuel's cries grew more insistent, and Wyatt felt his fragile composure begin to crack. "He won't eat. Nothing I try works." Ruby set the bread on a nearby table and stepped forward, her hands outstretched. "May I?" Without waiting for permission, she took the baby from Wyatt's arms with practiced ease, cradling him against her shoulder. "There now, little one," she murmured, her voice soothing. "What's the trouble, hum?" To Wyatt's astonishment, Samuel's cries began to soften. Ruby felt his forehead, checked his swaddling, and then looked up at Wyatt. "He feels a bit warm. How have you been feeding him?" "Goat's milk, mostly. Sometimes a sugar teat if he won't take the bottle." Ruby nodded thoughtfully. "I've known babies who don't take well to goat's milk." "Let me try something." She looked around. "Do you have any catnip and perhaps some fennel?" "In Sarah's in the herb garden," Wyatt said, gesturing toward the small plot behind the house. Ruby handed Samuel back to Wyatt. "I'll make him a tea. It might help settle his stomach." As she moved toward the door, Elijah appeared, eyeing her suspiciously. "Who are you?" "This is Miss Dawson," Wyatt said. "She's here about being our housekeeper." Elijah's gaze remained skeptical. "Can you cook? Ma made the best biscuits." A shadow of sadness crossed Ruby's face. "I'm very sorry about your mother, and yes, I can cook, though I don't know if my biscuits will measure up." "They won't," Elijah said with certainty, but there was less hostility in his voice. Ruby returned shortly with a handful of herbs and set about making a weak tea. She tested it on her wrist before offering a spoonful to Samuel. To Wyatt's surprise, the baby accepted it without protest. "See," Ruby said softly to Samuel. "That's better, isn't it?" The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity as Ruby took stock of the household. She organized the pantry, prepared a hearty stew for lunch, and somehow managed to get Charlotte to take a nap, a feat Wyatt hadn't accomplished in days. By mid-afternoon, she'd washed a mountain of laundry and hung it to dry, cleaned the kitchen, and made Samuel a proper bed in a drawer lined with soft blankets. As the sun began to set, Wyatt found her on the porch, rocking Samuel while the twins and Charlotte played a quiet game nearby. "Miss Dawson," he began, removing his hat. I'm prepared to offer you the position if you're still interested. Ruby looked up, her green eyes serious. Before you do, Mr. Parker, there's something you should know about me. Wyatt tensed. Go on. I came to Arizona to escape a difficult situation in Tucson. I worked as a school teacher there, but there was a married man who became fixated on me. He was influential in town, and when I rejected his advances, he made it impossible for me to continue working. I left rather than face ruin. Wyatt considered her words. You have references? From the school board in Tucson, yes, and from the family I lived with while teaching, they know the truth of the situation. Wyatt nodded slowly. We all have pasts, Miss Dawson. What matters to me is that you seem capable with my children and they appear to respond well to you. He paused. The position doesn't pay much, I'm afraid. Room and board plus $10 a month. That's fair, Ruby said. I don't require much, just… She hesitated. Yes. I would ask for your protection, should anyone from Tucson come looking for me. I don't anticipate it, but Mr. Hollister was not a man accustomed to being denied. Wyatt's jaw tightened. Any man who comes to my property with ill intentions toward you or my family will regret it, Miss Dawson. You have my word on that. Relief flickered across her face. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Parker. Good, Wyatt said, nodding once. You can move your things in tomorrow. Ruby looked down at Samuel, who had fallen asleep in her arms. I don't have much to move. Just one trunk at the boarding house in town. Wyatt felt a pang of sympathy. This young woman had fled her home with just one trunk of possessions, seeking safety and a new beginning, much as he and Sarah had done when they'd first come to Arizona territory 8 years ago. I'll have Frank bring your trunk tomorrow, he said. The small room off the kitchen will be yours. Ruby smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. Thank you, Mr. Parker. That night, for the first time in weeks, all of the Parker children slept peacefully. Ruby had settled Samuel in his makeshift bed, sung Charlotte a lullaby, and read a story to the twins. The quiet house felt less oppressive with her calm presence filling the spaces Sarah's absence had left. Wyatt sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee and watching as Ruby kneaded dough for the next morning's bread. Her movements were efficient, practiced. Where did you learn to bake? He asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Ruby glanced up, flour dusting her forearms. My grandmother. She raised me after my parents died of influenza when I was 10. I'm sorry for your loss, Wyatt said automatically, the words he'd heard so often recently now coming from his own lips. Ruby nodded in acknowledgement. It was a long time ago. My grandmother was a good woman, strict but fair. She paused in her kneading. May I ask about your wife? The children mentioned her, but… Wyatt took a deep breath. Sarah, we met in Kansas, married young, came out here to start the ranch when the twins were just babies. She was everything, kind, strong. Stubborn as a mule when she set her mind to something. He smiled faintly at the memory. She died of childbed fever after Samuel was born. I'm very sorry, Ruby said softly. She must have been remarkable to have raised such good children. She was, Wyatt agreed, surprised to find that speaking of Sarah brought more comfort than pain. She would have liked you, I think. Ruby resumed her kneading, a thoughtful expression on her face. I hope to honor her memory by caring for her children as she would have wanted. The sincerity in her voice eased something in Wyatt's chest. He stood, suddenly aware of the late hour. I should turn in. The cattle won't herd themselves tomorrow. Good night, Mr. Parker, Ruby said with a small nod. Wyatt, he corrected. If you're going to be living here, you might as well use my given name. Good night, Wyatt, she amended, and he found he liked the sound of his name on her lips. The following days established a rhythm to the household that had been missing since Sarah's death. Ruby rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, allowing Wyatt to focus on the ranch work. She taught Emma to sew, entertained Charlotte with simple games, and even convinced the skeptical Elijah to help in the vegetable garden. Most remarkably, Samuel began to thrive under her care, gaining weight and developing a lusty cry that no longer sounded desperate. Wyatt found himself watching Ruby when she wasn't looking the way she sang while hanging laundry, how she always seemed to know which child needed attention before they even asked for it, the gentle firmness with which she established boundaries. She never tried to replace Sarah, never presumed too much authority, yet the children responded to her as naturally as flowers turning toward the sun. One evening, about 3 weeks after Ruby's arrival, Wyatt returned from checking the north pasture to find her sitting on the porch, mending one of his shirts while Samuel slept in a basket beside her. "The other children?" he asked, settling into the chair next to hers. "Asleep," Ruby replied. "Charlotte wanted 3 stories tonight but finally surrendered to slumber." Wyatt chuckled. "She's determined that one—" "Like her father," Ruby observed with a small smile. The comment caught him off guard. "You think I'm determined?" Ruby set aside her mending, giving him her full attention. "I think a lesser man would have broken under the weight of what you've endured. Instead, you've kept this ranch running, kept your family together. That takes more than determination, it takes courage." Wyatt felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. "I haven't done it alone, not anymore." Their eyes met in the gathering dusk, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the partnership they had formed, unexpected but necessary. Samuel stirred in his basket, breaking the moment. Ruby immediately turned her attention to the baby, lifting him with practiced ease. "I'll take him in," she said, rising. "Good night, Wyatt." "Good night, Ruby," he replied, watching her disappear into the house with his son cradled against her shoulder. That night, Wyatt dreamed of Sarah for the first time since her death. In the dream, she stood in a field of wildflowers, smiling at him with the same radiant joy he remembered. "It's all right," she seemed to say, though no words passed her lips. "It's all right to keep living." He woke with tears on his face, but a lightness in his heart he hadn't felt in months. The arrival of summer brought scorching heat to the Arizona territory. The creek that ran through the Parker property began to dry up, and Wyatt spent long days ensuring the cattle had access to water. Ruby adapted the household routines to accommodate the heat, rising before dawn to bake bread and cook, allowing the kitchen to cool by midday. On particularly hot afternoons, she would take the children to the shaded spot where the creek pooled beneath a stand of cottonwood trees. There, the twins and Charlotte could splash in the cool water while Ruby sat on the bank with Samuel, now a chubby, smiling 4-month-old. Wyatt often found excuses to ride by the creek during these outings, ostensibly checking the water level but really stealing glances at the tableau they created. Ruby, with her copper hair loose from its usual bun, laughing as Elijah attempted to catch tiny fish with his bare hands. Emma teaching Charlotte to float on her back in the shallow water. Samuel cooing in the shade, reaching for the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. They looked like a family, his family, and the realization both comforted and unsettled him. One particularly stifling afternoon, Ruby had just settled the children for their naps when a rider approached the ranch house. Wyatt, who had come in for a midday meal, went to meet the visitor. The man who dismounted was expensively dressed despite the heat, his horse a fine Arabian that must have cost more than Wyatt earned in a year. He removed his hat, revealing silver-streaked dark hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the hardness of his expression. "I'm looking for Ruby Dawson," the man announced without preamble. Wyatt felt a chill despite the heat. "May I ask who's calling?" "James Hollister," the man replied, as if the name should mean something. When Wyatt's expression remained neutral, he added, "From Tucson." "I have business with Miss Dawson." Behind him, Wyatt heard the cabin door open. He turned to see Ruby standing on the porch, her face drained of color. "Mr. Hollister," she said, her voice remarkably steady despite her pallor. "What brings you to Bentonville?" Hollister's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You do, my dear. You left rather abruptly. Your students miss you terribly." "I left a letter of resignation with the school board," Ruby replied, stepping forward to stand beside Wyatt. "My position here is permanent." "Is it?" Hollister looked between them, his gaze calculating. "As a housekeeper, I understand. How appropriate for your station." He turned to Wyatt. "Mr. Parker, Wyatt Parker. This is my ranch, Mr. Hollister, and Miss Dawson is under my protection." Hollister raised an eyebrow. "Protection? From what, pray tell?" "I'm merely here to offer the lady an opportunity to return to Tucson. The school board has reconsidered her position. At my recommendation, of course." That's very kind, Ruby said with careful politeness, but as I said, I have made commitments here. Wyatt noticed she had clasped her hands tightly to prevent them from shaking. He moved slightly, positioning himself more firmly between Ruby and Hollister. Miss Dawson has made her wishes clear, he said. If that's all, Mr. Hollister, you've had a long ride for nothing. Hollister's expression hardened. I don't believe I've finished my conversation with Miss Dawson. I believe you have, Wyatt countered, his hand moving instinctively toward the pistol at his hip. This is private property, sir. For a tense moment, Hollister seemed to consider his options. Finally, he replaced his hat with deliberate slowness. Very well, but this matter isn't settled, Miss Dawson. I'll be staying at the Bentonville Hotel for several days should you reconsider my generous offer. He mounted his Arabian with practiced grace. Good day to you both. They watched in silence as he rode away, dust rising from his horse's hooves. When he was out of sight, Ruby released a shuddering breath. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never thought he would follow me here. Wyatt turned to her, taking in her trembling form. Without thinking, he placed his hands on her shoulders. You have nothing to apologize for. That man won't trouble you again, I promise. Ruby looked up at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. You don't understand. He's powerful, connected. He doesn't take rejection well. Neither do I, Wyatt said grimly, and this is my territory, not his. The sound of Samuel crying from inside the house broke the moment. Ruby stepped back, composing herself visibly. I should tend to the baby. Ruby, Wyatt called as she turned toward the house. We'll handle this together. She paused, looking back at him with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper he couldn't quite name. Then she nodded once and disappeared inside. That evening, after the children were asleep, Wyatt found Ruby sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of tea that had long gone cold. He sat across from her, waiting patiently until she was ready to talk. I met James Hollister at a school function, she began without preamble. He was charming, complimentary. I was flattered by his attention. He's a prominent businessman in Tucson, and I was just a schoolteacher. But then I learned he was married. She looked up, meeting Wyatt's gaze directly. I immediately distanced myself, made it clear I wasn't interested. That's when things changed. He couldn't accept your refusal, Wyatt supplied. Ruby nodded. At first it was small things. He would appear wherever I went in town, send gifts to the school that I returned. Then the rumors started that I had pursued him, that I was morally unfit to teach children. Her voice grew bitter. His wife believed him, of course. The school board began receiving complaints from parents. Eventually, I was given a choice, resign quietly or be dismissed publicly. So you left Tucson, Wyatt concluded. Yes, I thought Bentonville was far enough away, obscure enough that he wouldn't bother following. She laughed humorlessly. I underestimated his pride. Wyatt reached across the table, covering her hand with his. You're not alone in this, Ruby. I meant what I said. You have my protection, and not just because you're my housekeeper. Ruby turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining. Thank you, she said softly. You've been kind to me from the beginning, even when you had every reason to be wary of a stranger. You weren't a stranger for long, Wyatt replied, surprised by the truth of his words. In just over a month, Ruby had become essential to his household, to him. The thought of her leaving created a hollow feeling in his chest that he wasn't ready to examine too closely. The next day, Wyatt rode into Bentonville with Frank and 2 other ranch hands. They found James Hollister taking lunch at the hotel restaurant, looking completely at ease. Mr. Parker, Hollister greeted him with false joviality. Have you come to deliver Miss Dawson's change of heart? Wyatt sat down uninvited, his men remaining standing behind him. I've come to make something very clear, Hollister. Ruby Dawson is a valued member of my household. She has no intention of returning to Tucson now or ever. Hollister's smile thinned. I see. Has she told you her little tale of woe? Poor Ruby, pursued by the wicked married man. She's quite convincing, isn't she? Wyatt leaned forward, keeping his voice low. I know exactly what kind of man you are, Hollister. The kind who uses his position to intimidate women, who thinks his money entitles him to whatever and whoever he wants. Careful, Parker, Hollister warned. You don't know who you're dealing with. No, you don't know who you're dealing with, Wyatt countered. This is a small town, Hollister. People look out for their own here. Ruby is under my protection and the protection of every decent person in Bentonville." He nodded toward the window where Sheriff Miller stood watching them with interest. "Including our sheriff, who happens to be a good friend of mine." Hollister's facade of civility slipped, revealing the anger beneath. "She's a liar. She pursued me, then threatened to destroy my reputation when I rejected her. Ask anyone in Tucson." "I did," Wyatt replied calmly. "Frank here," he gestured to his foreman, "rode to Tucson 2 weeks ago with a letter for the family Ruby boarded with. Their reply was quite illuminating." He withdrew a folded letter from his pocket. "Would you like to hear what Mrs. Henderson had to say about your character, Mr. Hollister? Or about the other young women who left town rather than face your attentions?" Hollister's face paled, then flushed with anger. "This is preposterous." "I won't be threatened by a dirt farmer." "Rancher," Wyatt corrected mildly. "And this isn't a threat, it's a promise. You will leave Bentonville today and you will never contact Ruby Dawson again. If you do, this letter goes to your wife and to every newspaper in the Arizona Territory." The two men stared at each other across the table, the tension palpable. Finally, Hollister stood. "Keep your little schoolteacher," he spat. "She's not worth the trouble." Wyatt rose as well, his voice dangerously quiet. "She's worth everything, Hollister. That's something you'll never understand." As Hollister stormed from the restaurant, Sheriff Miller approached Wyatt's table. "Everything all right here, Wyatt?" "It is now," Wyatt replied, watching through the window as Hollister strode toward the livery stable. "I believe Mr. Hollister will be departing on the afternoon stage." The sheriff nodded knowingly. "I'll see him to it personally." When Wyatt returned to the ranch that evening, he found Ruby on the porch, rocking Samuel while the other children played in the yard. Her eyes sought his immediately, the question clear in them. "He's gone," Wyatt said simply, sitting beside her. "He won't be troubling you again." Relief washed over Ruby's face. "What did you do?" "Just had a conversation," Wyatt replied. "Made him understand that his reputation has more to lose than gain by pursuing you." Ruby studied his face. "Thank you," she said softly. "I've spent months looking over my shoulder. I didn't realize how exhausting it was until now." Wyatt wanted to reach for her hand, to pull her into his arms, but the children were watching, and he was acutely aware of the boundaries between them, employer and employee, widower and single woman, man and woman. Instead, he simply nodded. "You're safe here, Ruby, always." The months passed, and summer gave way to the cooler days of autumn. Samuel learned to sit up on his own, then to crawl, exploring the cabin with determined energy. Charlotte attached herself to Ruby like a shadow, following her through daily chores and proudly helping with simple tasks. The twins began attending the Bentonville school, returning each day with stories and new knowledge that they eagerly shared at the dinner table. Wyatt watched his family flourish under Ruby's care, even as he struggled with his growing feelings for her. She was no longer simply his housekeeper, she had become the heart of his household, as essential as air. Yet he kept his distance, respecting the arrangement they had made, fearing that to acknowledge his feelings would risk losing her entirely. Ruby, for her part, threw herself into caring for the Parker family with wholehearted dedication. She expanded the vegetable garden, put up preserves for winter, and taught Emma to cook simple meals. In the evenings, she would read to the children or help the twins with their schoolwork, while Wyatt sat nearby, ostensibly reviewing ranch accounts but often watching her over the top of his ledger. As winter approached, the days grew shorter and the evenings longer. After the children were asleep, Wyatt and Ruby would sometimes sit by the fire, talking quietly. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about meeting Sarah at a county fair, about their journey west. She shared stories of her grandmother, her training as a teacher, her dreams of someday having a family of her own. These quiet conversations became the part of the day Wyatt looked forward to most. In the firelight, with the children sleeping peacefully and the ranch settled for the night, they could simply be themselves, not employer and employee, but Wyatt and Ruby. Two people finding unexpected connection in the aftermath of loss and difficulty. One cold December evening, as they sat before the fire, Ruby looked up from her mending with an unusually hesitant expression. "Wyatt, there's something I need to discuss with you." Wyatt's heart sank, anticipating bad news. "What is it?" Ruby set aside her sewing, folding her hands in her lap. "The children have been asking about Christmas. I know it might be difficult with this being the first one without Sarah, but I thought perhaps—" "Yes," Wyatt interrupted, relief flooding through him. "Yes, we should celebrate Christmas properly. For the children." Ruby's face brightened. "Really?" "I wasn't sure if it would be too painful." Wyatt considered her words. "There will be sadness," he acknowledged. "But Sarah loved Christmas. She wouldn't want the children to miss it because of grief." "I was thinking we could cut a small tree," Ruby suggested, her enthusiasm evident. "Make decorations with the children. I can teach them some carols, and perhaps we could have a special dinner." "Sarah used to make cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning," Wyatt said, the memory bittersweet. "The twins still talk about them." "I could try to recreate them," Ruby offered. "If you think that would be all right," Wyatt nodded, touched by her thoughtfulness. "I think they'd like that." They spent the next few weeks preparing for Christmas in small ways. Ruby helped the children make paper chains to decorate the cabin and taught them to string cranberries and popcorn for the tree. Emma and Elijah made simple gifts for their younger siblings, while Charlotte colored pictures for everyone. Even Samuel participated, smacking his hands gleefully in the flour as Ruby baked cookies. 2 days before Christmas, Wyatt rode into town with a list of supplies and a secret mission of his own. As he tied his horse outside the general store, he noticed a poster advertising a Christmas dance at the town hall on Christmas Eve. Inside, Mrs. Thompson greeted him warmly. "Wyatt Parker, just the man I wanted to see. You are bringing those beautiful children to the Christmas dance, aren't you?" "And that lovely Miss Dawson?" Wyatt hesitated. "I hadn't thought about it. The baby nonsense," Mrs. Thompson interrupted. "Plenty of babies at these dances. My Josephine would be happy to hold little Samuel for a spell so Miss Dawson could enjoy herself." She peered at him over her spectacles. "That poor girl hasn't had a moment's fun since she arrived in Bentonville. Always working, always with those children." Guilt twisted in Wyatt's stomach. It was true Ruby had no life outside of the Parker household, no friends her own age, no social activities, no time to herself. "We'll be there," he found himself saying. "All of us." Mrs. Thompson beamed. "Wonderful. Now, what can I help you find today?" Wyatt purchased the items on Ruby's list, then asked Mrs. Thompson to show him the fabric selection. He chose a length of green wool that matched Ruby's eyes, arranging to have it wrapped separately and held at the store. Then he visited the jeweler, where he selected a simple silver locket. "For your wife?" the jeweler asked as he wrapped the small package. "For a friend," Wyatt replied, unwilling to explain the complicated nature of his relationship with Ruby. The jeweler gave him a knowing look but said nothing more. When Wyatt returned to the ranch, he found Ruby and the children making paper snowflakes to hang in the windows. "Look, Pa!" Charlotte exclaimed, holding up a misshapen but enthusiastic creation. "Snow, that's beautiful, sweetheart," Wyatt said, lifting her for a kiss. Over her head, he met Ruby's gaze. "I have news. There's a Christmas dance in town on Christmas Eve. I thought we might all attend." Ruby's eyes widened in surprise. "All of us, even Samuel," Wyatt confirmed. "Mrs. Thompson's daughter offered to help with him so you could dance." He hesitated, then added, "If you'd like to, that is." A faint blush colored Ruby's cheeks. "I would enjoy that very much, thank you." Emma tugged at Ruby's skirt. "Can I wear my blue dress? The one with the ribbons?" "Of course," Ruby replied, still looking at Wyatt with a mixture of surprise and pleasure. "We'll make sure everyone looks their best." Christmas Eve arrived with a rare dusting of snow, just enough to make the landscape glitter in the winter sunlight. The cabin smelled of pine from the small tree in the corner and cinnamon from Ruby's baking. Wyatt had arranged for Frank to drive them to town in the wagon, allowing Ruby to focus on getting the children dressed in their Sunday best. When they were finally ready, Ruby emerged from her room in a dress Wyatt had never seen before, a simple blue cotton, but neatly fitted to her slender form with a lace collar that framed her face. She had arranged her copper hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun, with soft curls framing her face. Wyatt stared, momentarily speechless. She looked beautiful not in the obvious way of saloon girls or wealthy city women, but with a natural grace that seemed to illuminate her from within. "Is something wrong?" Ruby asked, misinterpreting his silence. "No," Wyatt managed. "You look very nice." It was an inadequate compliment, but Ruby smiled as if he'd composed poetry for her. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." The Christmas dance was a lively affair. The town hall had been decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and a fiddler and pianist provided cheerful music. The twins immediately found friends from school, while Charlotte was content to stay with Ruby, watching the dancers with wide eyes. True to her word, Mrs. Thompson's daughter, Josephine, offered to take Samuel, who was resplendent in a new outfit Ruby had made him. "Go on," Josephine urged Ruby. "Dance a little. I have 4 of my own. I know how to manage a baby." Ruby hesitated, looking to Wyatt for guidance. "You should enjoy yourself," he said, though the thought of her dancing with other men created an unexpected knot in his stomach. "You've earned it." As if on cue, young Tom Wilson from the bank approached, hat in hand. "Miss Dawson, would you honor me with a dance?" Ruby glanced at Wyatt once more, then nodded to Tom. "I'd be delighted." Wyatt watched as Tom led Ruby onto the dance floor, joining the other couples in a lively reel. She moved with natural grace, her face flushed with enjoyment, her laughter carrying over the music. Several other men took their turns dancing with her, and Wyatt found himself counting the minutes until he could reasonably claim a dance of his own. Finally, as the musicians began a waltz, he approached her. "May I have this dance, Miss Dawson?" Ruby's smile was radiant. "I'd be honored, Mr. Parker." As he took her in his arms, Wyatt was acutely aware of how perfectly she fit against him, how natural it felt to guide her across the floor. They had never been this close before, and the scent of lavender in her hair made his head swim slightly. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "Very much," Ruby replied. "It's been so long since I've danced." "You're very good at it," she laughed softly. "My grandmother insisted I learn properly. She said a lady should know how to dance, even if she never attended grand balls." "Your grandmother was wise." They fell silent then, moving together to the music, each acutely aware of the other. When the waltz ended, Wyatt reluctantly released her, already missing the warmth of her in his arms. "Thank you for the dance," Ruby said, her cheeks pink. "The pleasure was mine," Wyatt replied, meaning it more than she could know. The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur. The children grew tired early, as expected, and by 9 o'clock they were ready to return home. As they rode back to the ranch under a sky brilliant with stars, Charlotte fell asleep in Ruby's lap and Samuel dozed in his basket. The twins fought valiantly to stay awake, but eventually succumbed to the gentle rocking of the wagon. When they arrived home, Wyatt carried Charlotte while Ruby took Samuel, and they put the children to bed with whispered reminders that Santa would come while they slept. Once the children were settled, they returned to the main room where the fire had burned low. "I should add wood to the fire," Wyatt said, moving toward the hearth. "It's going to be cold tonight." Ruby nodded, her hands busy arranging the children's gifts beneath the small tree. "It was a lovely evening," she said softly. "Thank you for insisting we go." "You deserved a night of enjoyment," Wyatt replied, stoking the fire. "You work too hard." "I enjoy my work," Ruby said simply. "Your children," she stopped, then corrected herself. "The children are a joy." Wyatt straightened, turning to face her. "They're your children too, in many ways. You've been more than a housekeeper to them, Ruby." She looked up at him, her expression unguarded in the firelight. "I've grown to love them as if they were my own," she admitted. "I hope that's not overstepping." "No," Wyatt said, taking a step toward her. "It's a gift, to them and to me." Ruby stood, smoothing her skirt nervously. "I should retire. Morning will come early, especially with excited children." "Wait," Wyatt said, reaching into his pocket. "I have something for you, a Christmas gift." Ruby's eyes widened. "But I don't expect anything in return," Wyatt assured her, holding out the small package wrapped in brown paper. "Please." With hesitant fingers, Ruby accepted the gift and unwrapped it carefully. When she opened the small box to reveal the silver locket, she gasped softly. "Wyatt, it's beautiful. Open it," he urged. Inside, he had placed a tiny photograph of the children, their four faces crowded together in a moment of rare stillness captured by a traveling photographer who had passed through Bentonville in October. Tears filled Ruby's eyes. "I don't know what to say." Wyatt took the locket from her trembling hands and stepped behind her. "May I?" she nodded, lifting her hair as he fastened the locket around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, and he felt her slight shiver at his touch. When she turned to face him, the locket gleamed against the blue of her dress. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure it always." Impulsively, Wyatt reached out to touch her cheek. "Ruby," the sound of Samuel crying interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Ruby stepped back, her hand flying to the locket. "I should check on him." Wyatt nodded, letting his hand fall to his side. "Good night, Ruby. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Wyatt," she replied softly before hurrying to tend to the baby. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. The children woke early, their excited voices carrying through the cabin as they discovered their gifts. Wyatt had carved wooden toys for each of them: a horse for Elijah, a doll for Emma, a little wagon for Charlotte, and a rattle for Samuel. Ruby had knitted warm scarves and made each child a small cloth bag filled with candy and nuts. The simple breakfast of cinnamon rolls was declared almost as good as Mama's by the twins' high praise that brought a pleased flush to Ruby's cheeks. After they ate, Wyatt surprised everyone by producing one last gift from behind his chair. "For you," he said, handing the package to Ruby, "from all of us." Ruby untied the string around the brown paper package to reveal the green wool fabric she had admired in the general store months ago, but had deemed too expensive for practical use. "Oh, Wyatt," she breathed, running her fingers over the soft material. "It's lovely." "Emma helped choose it," he said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "We thought it would match your eyes." Ruby looked up, meeting his gaze with such warmth that Wyatt felt it like a physical touch. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay such kindness." "You repay it every day," he said simply. The moment was broken by Elijah demanding that his father come see how fast his new wooden horse could run, and the day continued in a whirl of play, food, and laughter. But throughout it all, Wyatt was aware of Ruby's glances, of the silver locket that caught the light as she moved, of the way she seemed to belong in this home, with this family with him. Winter passed slowly in the Arizona territory, with occasional cold rains and rare dustings of snow. The Parker Ranch settled into a comfortable routine, with Wyatt and his men tending to the cattle while Ruby managed the household. Samuel grew stronger each day, now pulling himself up on furniture and babbling constantly. He had begun calling Ruby Mama, a development that had first embarrassed her greatly. "I didn't teach him that," she had assured Wyatt when it first happened. "I always refer to myself as Ruby when I talk to him." "It's all right," Wyatt had replied, watching his son reach eagerly for Ruby. "He knows who cares for him." As spring approached, bringing new growth to the range and longer days, Wyatt found himself facing a truth he could no longer deny. He had fallen in love with Ruby Dawson. The realization came not in a sudden epiphany, but as a gradual certainty, like the changing of seasons. She had become essential to his happiness, not just as the caretaker of his children, but as the woman who had brought light back into his life. Yet he hesitated to speak of his feelings, uncertain of Ruby's own heart and unwilling to risk the stable household they had built together. If she didn't return his affection, or felt obligated by her position to pretend she did, the situation could become impossible for all of them. Ruby, meanwhile, had her own struggles. Her feelings for Wyatt had grown far beyond the gratitude and respect of an employee for a kind employer. She loved him not just for his kindness to her or for the protection he had offered when she most needed it, but for the man he was. Honorable, hardworking, devoted to his children. She loved the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his large hands when he held Samuel, the quiet strength he brought to every task. But she kept these feelings carefully hidden, convinced that Wyatt still mourned Sarah too deeply to consider loving another woman. Besides, she told herself, she was the children's caretaker. It would be presumptuous and inappropriate to expect more. So they continued their dance of unspoken feelings, each treasuring the quiet evenings by the fire, the shared laughter over the children's antics, the brief touches that seemed to linger longer than strictly necessary. In late March, as the first wildflowers began to appear on the range, a letter arrived from Tucson addressed to Ruby. She opened it with trembling fingers, fearing news of James Hollister, but instead found a letter from her former landlady, Mrs. Henderson. "Is everything all right?" Wyatt asked, noticing her expression as she read. Ruby looked up, her face a mixture of emotions. "It's from Mrs. Henderson. She writes that the Tucson School Board is seeking a new headmistress for the girls' school. They've specifically requested that I apply." She passed him the letter. Apparently, Mr. Hollister's wife has finally learned of his indiscretions. There's been quite a scandal, and he's lost much of his influence in town. Wyatt read the letter, a cold feeling spreading through his chest. "This is a good opportunity for you," he said carefully, though the words felt like stones in his mouth. "A headmistress position would be prestigious, better pay than," he gestured vaguely, "than this." Ruby studied his face. "Yes, it would be." An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Wyatt forced himself to say what honor demanded. "You should consider it. You're qualified, certainly, and you've always spoken fondly of teaching." Ruby folded the letter slowly. "Yes, I enjoyed teaching very much." "Will you apply then?" Wyatt asked, dreading her answer. "I don't know," Ruby admitted. "It's unexpected. I need time to think." "Of course," Wyatt said, rising from the table. "Take all the time you need. I should check on the men at the north pasture." He left quickly before she could see the conflict in his eyes. Outside, he mounted his horse with more force than necessary, spurring the animal into a gallop away from the ranch house, away from the possibility of losing the woman he loved, but had never claimed. Ruby watched him go, the letter clutched in her hand, her heart heavy with uncertainty. The position in Tucson represented a return to the life she had planned for herself before James Hollister had derailed her career. It would mean independence, respect, the chance to use her education and training. It was everything she had once wanted, but that was before the Parker family. Before Samuel's first toothless smile, before Charlotte's bedtime stories, before the twins' hard-won acceptance. Before Wyatt. For the next few days, tension hung over the Parker household. Wyatt spent long hours away from the house, returning only for meals and to bid the children good night. Ruby went about her duties with her usual efficiency, but her normal cheerfulness was subdued. The children, sensitive to the changed atmosphere, became clingy and irritable. "Are you going away?" Emma asked one afternoon as Ruby helped her with her spelling. Ruby looked up, startled. "What makes you ask that?" Emma shrugged, her small face serious. "Pa's sad again, like after Mama died, and you're quiet." Ruby set aside the spelling book, giving Emma her full attention. "Your father and I have some adult matters to discuss, but you shouldn't worry." "But are you going away?" Emma persisted. Ruby hesitated, unwilling to lie but unable to provide certainty. "I received an offer for a teaching position in Tucson. I'm considering it." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But who will take care of us? Who will make Samuel stop crying and help Charlotte with her nightmares? Who will cook Pa's favorite pie when he's had a hard day?" Ruby gathered the child into her arms, her own eyes stinging. "Oh, Emma, you and your siblings mean the world to me. Whatever decision I make, please know that." That evening, after the children were asleep, Ruby found Wyatt sitting on the porch, staring out at the starlit landscape. She sat beside him, the wooden boards creaking slightly beneath her weight. "We need to talk," she said softly. Wyatt nodded without looking at her. "You've made your decision." "No," Ruby replied. "I haven't, but I can't make it alone, Wyatt." Now he turned to her, his expression guarded. "What do you mean?" Ruby took a deep breath. "Emma asked me today if I was leaving. She's noticed the tension between us and it's upsetting her." "Upsetting all the children, I suspect." Wyatt ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry for that. I've been struggling with the thought of you leaving." "Have you asked me to stay?" Ruby countered gently. Wyatt looked surprised. I wouldn't presume to influence your decision. This is an important opportunity for you. It is, Ruby agreed, but so is this. She gestured to the house behind them. What we've built here, the family we've become, that matters to me, Wyatt, more than a prestigious position or a return to my old life. Hope flickered in Wyatt's eyes. What are you saying, Ruby? Ruby reached for his hand, her heart pounding. I'm saying that I love your children as if they were my own, and I'm saying that I love you, Wyatt Parker, in a way I never expected to love anyone. Wyatt stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then he lifted her hand to his lips. I've been a fool, he said against her fingers. A proud, hesitant fool. I've loved you for months, Ruby. Maybe since that first day when you walked up to the door with a loaf of bread and somehow knew exactly what we needed. Joy bloomed in Ruby's chest, so intense it was almost painful. Why didn't you say anything? Fear, Wyatt admitted. Fear that you wouldn't feel the same. Fear that you deserved better than a widowed rancher with 4 young children. Fear that speaking my feelings would somehow dishonor Sarah's memory. And now, Ruby asked, her voice barely above a whisper, now I'm more afraid of losing you, Wyatt said simply. Stay, Ruby, not as our housekeeper, but as my wife, as the children's mother, if you'll have us. Tears spilled down Ruby's cheeks, but her smile was radiant. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. Wyatt pulled her into his arms then, his kiss gentle but filled with the promise of the passion they had both restrained for so long. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Ruby rested her forehead against his. I never thought I'd find this, she murmured. A home, a family, love, neither did I, Wyatt confessed. After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. And then you walked in with that loaf of bread and everything changed. Ruby laughed softly, remembering that day. I was so nervous. I'd spent my last coins on flour for that bread, hoping it might help my case for employment. Wyatt brushed a strand of hair from her face. Best investment you ever made. They were married 2 weeks later in the Bentonville church, with the children standing proudly beside them. Emma and Charlotte wore wreaths of spring flowers in their hair, while Elijah held the rings with solemn importance. Samuel, now nearly 10 months old, was passed among the ranch hands during the ceremony, cooing happily at all the attention. After the simple service, the entire town gathered at the Parker Ranch for a celebration. Tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes. A fiddler played cheerful tunes, and children darted between the adults' legs in games of tag. Ruby, resplendent in a new dress made from the green wool Wyatt had given her for Christmas, moved among their guests with natural grace, accepting congratulations and introducing herself as Mrs. Parker with quiet pride. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the gathering, Wyatt found his new wife standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching the children play with a contented smile. Happy, he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Ruby leaned into him. Completely, and you? More than I ever thought possible, Wyatt replied honestly. Thank you for bringing life back to this family to me. Ruby turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. You gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. You protected me when I was vulnerable. You trusted me with your precious children. If anyone should be grateful, it's me. Wyatt smiled, thinking of how far they had come since that desperate day when Ruby had appeared on his doorstep. Let's agree to be grateful together, then, for second chances and new beginnings. And for good bread, Ruby added with a teasing smile. Wyatt laughed, pulling her closer. Especially for good bread. As twilight descended on the Parker Ranch, the newlyweds rejoined their celebration, surrounded by friends, family, and the promise of a future built on love that had come unexpectedly, but was no less precious for its surprise arrival, like a loaf of warm bread on the doorstep of a home hungry for hope. 5 years later, the Parker Ranch had flourished under Wyatt and Ruby's partnership. They had added 2 more children to their family, 3-year-old Thomas and 1-year-old Grace, bringing their brood to 6. The original 4 had adapted to their new siblings with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but all had embraced Ruby completely as their mother. Samuel, now nearly 6, had no memory of Sarah but knew her through the stories Wyatt and Ruby told him. At 5, he was a sturdy boy with his father's determined nature and his stepmother's love of books. Charlotte, now 8, had blossomed under Ruby's gentle guidance, developing a talent for drawing that amazed everyone who saw her work. The twins, 12 years old and as different as two siblings could be, were both thriving. Emma as a natural caretaker who helped Ruby with the younger children, and Elijah as his father's shadow on the ranch. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Wyatt surprised Ruby with a new piano for the parlor they had added to the house the previous year. She had mentioned once, in passing, that she'd learned to play as a girl but hadn't touched a piano in years. "Wyatt," she gasped when the men from town delivered it. "How did you manage this? The cattle drive last fall was profitable," he said with a grin. "And you deserve something that's just for you after all you do for this family." That evening, after the children were in bed, Ruby sat at the piano, her fingers hesitantly finding the keys. Slowly, a melody emerged, rusty at first, then with growing confidence. "That's beautiful," Wyatt said, sitting beside her on the bench. "What's it called?" "Come Home," Ruby replied softly. "My grandmother taught it to me. It seems appropriate somehow." Wyatt placed his hand over hers on the keys. "You brought home to us, Ruby. When Sarah died, I thought we'd lost it forever. But you walked in with that loaf of bread, and somehow you knew exactly how to heal what was broken." Ruby leaned her head against his shoulder. "We healed each other, and together we've built something even stronger than what was broken." Outside, the Arizona night spread star-studded and vast over the Parker Ranch. Inside, in the warm lamplight of the parlor, Wyatt and Ruby sat together at the piano, their shared love a melody that continued to sustain them through all of life's changing seasons.